Hello, podheads, and welcome to another episode of Over My Dead Pod. This is your host for today, Kate Carter.
I'm Kylie Colwell.
And I'm Holly Spear.
Today's story takes us back to a quiet Texas town in the summer of 1980, a town where neighbors waved to each other across the street, churches were filled on the weekends, park picnics were daily, and life felt safe, almost too safe. But behind the white picket fences and the Sunday smiles, a storm was brewing. Two women named Candy Montgomery and Betty Gore were best friends, church companions, and well known throughout their community. But when secrets, betrayal, and simmering tension came to the surface, that picture perfect life ended in the most brutal way imaginable. It was a warm day in June 1980 when Betty Gore was found dead in her home. She had been struck over 41 times with an axe. And the person at the center of it all, none other than her best friend, Candy Montgomery. How did a seemingly ordinary housewife end up at the heart of one of Texas' most shocking murder trials? Was it self-defense or cold-blooded rage? This is the story of Candy Montgomery, the axe murderer of Betty Gore, and the small-town scandal that still haunts Texas to this day. When we think about violent crime, we often imagine or think that it's strangers, like, oh my God, did they know this person? Did they not? But on this podcast, we ladies know better because the truth is most murders don't happen that way. Most brutal murders, the victims are known by their killers. And sometimes the killer is someone that they consider a really close friend or family member. So today's story comes out of the town of Wylie, Texas, Wylie. In the late 1970s, Wylie was more farmland than like suburban. The town was super quiet. It had a population of only a few thousand. It basically was miles and miles of grassland and farms, and then these cute little farmhouses that popped up like here and there.
I like the name Wylie
I do too.
for a
Isn't that
town.
cute?
It's Wylie.
Yeah. So families who lived in Wylie or moved to Wylie did so because they knew the town was safe. This was the type of town that no one really had to like lock their doors. Crime just wasn't really happening there. Not only was it a safe town, but it was also filled with churches and schools. And these two things connected the town together more than anything else. At the center of the town was one of the largest churches. It was called the Fifth United Methodist Church. And this is where our two girls, Betty Gore and Candy Montgomery, first met and eventually where they became the best of friends. Going to get into Betty Gore first. Now, when I say her name, yes, Gore is her last name, which is very unfortunate. She was born Betty Pomeroy, like Pomeranian, but Pomeroy, on January 9th, 1950 in Harper, Kansas, to a normal, modest, like church-going family. She wasn't an only child, but I also couldn't figure out how many siblings she had. But I do know that she wasn't the only one. Her parents were married and seemed to have a healthy relationship. By the time Betty was a teenager, she was described as a shy and quiet girl, but very loyal and dependable. She was kind of the girl, like she always followed rules. She did what she was told. She did well in school. And she had a really small, like close-knit group of friends. After high school, Betty went off to Southwestern College, which is in Winfield, Texas, small college. And it was there that she met future husband, Alan Gore. And now Alan, he wasn't like a flashy dude at all. Like he wasn't a partier. He was a good guy. He was very kind like Betty and was very dominant at education. So after graduating, the two of them got married. Alan soon got a job in Texas in a tech field for a company called Texas Instruments, which still exists, very large company. And the couple quickly decided to settle down in the town of Wylie. So they bought a house together. They decided to start a family. Now, while Alan was working in tech, Betty decided to become a middle school teacher to a local school in Wylie called R.C. Dodd Middle School. Now, she was known to be a wonderful teacher. She really cared about her students, but to her fellow teachers, she was known to be very quiet and withdrawn. She wasn't really social to them. It's not just because she was a quiet person in general, but back home, Betty definitely was struggling from postpartum. After her first child was born, her name was Alyssa, in the mid 1970s, Betty began to have postpartum depression, like the blues. And then their second daughter was born only 3 or 4 years later in 1979, Bethany. I can't even imagine back then postpartum depression being talked about because it isn't talked about these days. And like, I know Kylie and Holly hear me talk about this shit all the time, but like, there's a lot of things that have to do with birth that people just don't talk about, and we need to be more open about. And the postpartum blues is like a huge fucking thing because something I didn't know with it. And we actually see these with a lot of stories, like the mom killed the family, or, she went on a rampage and then killed herself, stuff like that. Postpartum depression doesn't always happen right after the baby's born. It can happen years later. It's a medical condition, but it's some type of toxins in your brain that change.
I feel like it's just now kind of like a hot topic and just
Right.
being talked about without a taboo surrounding it.
It was definitely, yeah, I think a lot of just pregnancy things were taboo. Like you got pregnant, you had your kids, you're a stay-at-home mom. Well, Betty wasn't, but like you're supposed to be the housewife and be fine and everything. You have no time to be sad. So she was definitely withdrawn, and also she was a quiet girl in general. So, it's just sad. But husband Alan, though, Alan Gore, he was a good provider for the family, but he also, just like Betty, wasn't emotionally like there all the way. Like they weren't very, let's sit down and chat about this kind of shit. So not only did Betty feel isolated kind of in her own world, but at some point in the marriage that it became strained, which is also a very normal thing post kids. On the surface, Betty's life looked like, picture perfect. She had a steady job, loving husband, two beautiful kids, but obviously underneath it all was a woman who felt isolated, overwhelmed, and just sad. With that being said, Betty and Alan did try to make things work through their marriage. They still went to church on Sundays, still had friends over for dinners, like on a weekly basis. They were pretty prominent in the community, though they were a quiet family. So just a few houses down, another family similar to the Gores were the Montgomerys. And they were pretty much everything the Gores weren't in a way. Like, so the wife, her name was Candy. She's our girl today. And she was very outgoing. She was an energetic, like beautiful, fun personality. So Candy was born Candace Wheeler in 1949 in Dallas, Texas. So she's born and raised Texas. And unlike most of the stories we hear about, just like Betty's, Candy's childhood wasn't really like scandalous or shrouded in chaos. In fact, it was more ordinary than ever. She hadn't grown up in a religious family, but in a military one. Her dad was in the army, which meant Candy was used to moving around often as a kid. And because of that, she like said this is how she knew she could make friends really quickly and just wherever she went because she was very used to it. So by adulthood, she knew how to basically make friends anywhere and charm the pants off of anyone and everyone. After college, Candy decided that she wanted to pursue a career as a private secretary. She always wanted to do something great in life, but she knew she needed like stepping stools to get there. She had always wanted a family of her own as well, like stability, basically a place where she could build her own, American dream kind of thing. And in her 20s, after she graduated college, she met and married a man named Pat Montgomery. Now, Pat was an electrical engineer, and he happened to also work at the company called Texas Instruments, where Alan worked. So Pat was pretty successful at his job, just like Alan was, but Pat brought in more money. And so he was able to provide a very comfortable life for his wife and then later on two kids. Once Candy had kids with Pat, she became a full time stay at home mom. Now, on the outside, just like the Gores, Candy and Pat had it all. They had a nice house, they had two cars, they went on vacations often, and they were very, very well known within the community. But Candy was restless in a way, I guess you would say. She kind of became bored of being like the stay at home mom. She always was a thrill seeker, wanted excitement. And, like once you have kids, the vacations kind of start to slow down and you're doing more things for your kids than you are for you as a couple. So she wanted more. And it was through the Methodist church I talked about earlier that Candy and Betty's lives intersected. So they met one day during a service after noticing that their daughters were all around the same age. And the two girls started beginning to see more and more of each other. They often had play dates. The girls attended Sunday school together. They even started going to choir rehearsals together, too. On the surface, both of them seemed to be best friends because they were always together, like pretty much on a daily basis. But Candy's vibrant, confident personality seemed to really only highlight everything Betty was not. Betty, who we know struggled to pretty much feel comfortable in her own skin, couldn't help but notice that Candy was super outgoing all the time and like could fit in anywhere. Candy, well, she couldn't help but notice Betty's husband, Alan. It was in 1978 that Candy Montgomery decided she wanted something different for herself. She loved her children, she loved her housewife life, and she even loved her husband, Pat, but she became bored. And so her life in Wiley, Texas had become predictable, which was like her worst nightmare. Church, kids, chores, choir, dinner groups, repeats. And she always wanted excitement. She wanted to feel desired. So now we insert Alan Gore into the story. Alan Gore was born in the post-war years. I couldn't find an actual birth date for him, but this was when like the world was kind of reshaping itself, like the US especially, and definitely within the borders of Texas, which is where Alan grew up. Alan was the son of good, hardworking parents. His childhood was very normal, but he did grow up in a household where like achievement was expected. It wasn't, it was mandatory. So he always had to study really hard for school, which did him good in the long run because he was very smart. He was known to be very polite and well mannered, but also quiet, just like his future wife, Betty. He definitely wasn't like a troublemaker. And when Alan eventually met Betty in college, he was teaching on the side to make extra income. And the two of them quickly bonded over like their similarities and eventually fell in love and got married and babies. So back to our story in Texas, I have to say, Alan wasn't the most, I don't want to say he wasn't attractive, but like he's not like, damn, like this is, yeah, you pull up those pictures, Kylie. He wasn't the most handsome or like charming dude. He was a quiet, shy guy, but he was definitely like a gentle soul type. He was very kind hearted. If you can think of like a safe person, Alan is like a safe person. He was a good guy.
He looks like a newscaster.
That's a good way to put it. One evening in 1978, after a church volleyball game, Candy had been walking with Alan in the parking lot to their individual cars because also this wasn't out of that ordinary. Like Candy and Betty are best friends. So obviously, like Candy had a good relationship with Alan. She was always around. They saw each other. So they played on the same team. And as Candy and Alan stood in the parking lot that night, Candy told him straight up that she was attracted to him and asked if he'd be interested in having an affair. The whole idea of this like wasn't romantic, to be honest. It wasn't emotional. Like she wasn't super interested in like cheating. She was more because she wasn't gonna like leave her husband. That was like the whole thing. And she wasn't in love with Alan. She just promoted the idea of it of being like purely a fun physical thing that they could like look forward to.
That's so weird. Like, hello, may I interest you in an affair?
Yes. No, that literally, yeah. Because like she knew Alan, she knew what he looked like and his personality, but she wasn't like gonna change her life for him. Like it was definitely just let's do this for fun.
She just wanted him in the sheets and not in the streets.
Amen. Okay, so it didn't really come out of like nowhere for Candy at least, but earlier in the night when the two of them were playing in their co-ed volleyball game together, there was a point where like they both collided into each other trying to get a like make a play on the ball. When they collided together, it was like super harmless, like nobody noticed it kind of thing. But for Candy, it was like she said it was like this moment of realization that like Alan, quote unquote, Alan Gore smelled like sex. That's what she said.
What does that mean?
Obviously, you've never bumped into someone that smells like sex.
I guess not.
Now to the parking lot. Obviously, Alan's super surprised about what Candy just told him. He told Candy that he loved Betty and he didn't think he would ever do something like that to her. He had never considered cheating on her, but dude, Candy was persistent. She knew what she wanted. She told Alan she wasn't looking for love. She wasn't looking for like a long-term relationship. She just wanted something fun and worth waking up for every day, which like shit, that makes me think her kids and her husband weren't waking up for it, but to each their own. So over the next few weeks, Alan and Candy kind of danced around the idea of having this affair. And at some point, this is so weird, they got together in person to make a pros and cons list about having an affair with each other.
They're treating this like a
contractual
business deal, like
yes.
a merger. What is this?
Yeah. There was a piece of paper that came later in the story that was found in the Gore's house.
Don't tell me they made a contract.
No, they wrote a pros and cons list.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And so the pros were three things: excitement, intimacy, and escape. And the cons were three things: guilt, risk, hurting the families. Straight to the point.
I have to say, this is like the nerdiest affair.
It is. Yeah, it really is. It really is. So I think they're thinking too much into it, like that's just, I don't like the idea of like planning out the affair.
I think I'd be more mad that my
Yeah, it's
spouse,
premeditated.
yeah, sat there and thought about it for so long. It wasn't just like a crazy, not that that would make it any better, but I don't know,
Right.
maybe. Like what?
This definitely gives me like emotional shit,
Yeah. You made a pros and cons list and decided the pros outweighed the cons. Okay.
Well, eventually the pros won and the two agreed to begin having an affair. But they also, not only that the pros and cons list was enough, but they decided to place some rules into action as well. So some of these rules included the following: if either of them ever wanted to end the affair, they could. If either of them became too emotionally involved, it would be done. If either of them started taking risks that shouldn't be taken, the affair would end. And the pair would only meet during the weekdays while their spouses were at work. And then all expenses like the food and motel rooms would be split equally.
These people are just bored.
As you can only imagine, the affair routine was really awkward at first. Alan was a shy, quiet, inexperienced dude to all of this. And Candy's like this very flamboyant, confident, outgoing. So every week they started meeting at a motel in Richardson, Texas, which is about a 20-minute drive from Wiley. They would bring lunch to eat together before heading into a motel room. So, a little dine and dash bedroom situation, which like who after
Okay.
you eat does that? But anyways, when it was over, the sexual stuff, they'd return to their respective families or jobs. And not only did the meetups happen, but this is what I also don't like: the two of them called each other almost every day on their lunch breaks to talk. So if they weren't meeting up once a week, they were talking to each other on their lunch breaks.
Something tells me they weren't talking about anything exciting.
How's your work today? Good. What color's the sky? I don't know. Blue?
Weather's nice.
Yeah. And for a while, honestly, this was exactly what Candy wanted. She just wanted like that little bit of excitement to look forward to. But a year later, in 1979, Alan began to start feeling guilty. Only took a year. This is pretty much when Betty had just given birth to their second daughter, Bethany. And while their marriage was far from perfect, like I talked about earlier, Alan wanted to recommit to his family and stop the love affair. So he told Candy that can you imagine being pregnant and your husband's doing this with your best friend? Just saying.
Murder.
Yeah. He'd be dead, So Alan told Candy one day that it was over. He didn't want to do it anymore. And at first, Candy accepted it. At least that's what she told him. And to the looks of it, she did accept it. She began continuing on as Betty's best friend, especially after her second child's birth. And the two of them did everything normal as they normally would have in the Wiley community and at church. But 1 year later, on June 13th, 1980, all things would change. So we're going to talk about a Friday. That's June 13th. That morning, Candy stopped by Betty's house to pick up a swimsuit for Betty's youngest daughter, Alyssa. Apparently, Alyssa was going to be spending the night at Candy's house for a sleepover with her kids. Betty greeted Candy at the front door like she always did. Candy stepped inside, and the two women chatted for a little bit in the Gore's living room. And then, almost out of nowhere, Betty stopped in the middle of her sentence, looked at Candy, and said, quote, "Are you having an affair with my husband?" End quote. Betty didn't yell it. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It was just a quiet question for Candy. And obviously taken off guard, Candy hesitated, but she finally did admit that yes, she and Betty's husband, Alan, had been involved together, but it had been over for months now. Now, when Candy said this to Betty, Betty apparently didn't say anything back, and she just stared at her, which is a little, like, what are you mentally processing? Or is this a creepy moment? Or are you just processing everything? But then, according to Candy, Betty stood up, grabbed the girl's bathing suit, and walked out of the room. Second later, when she returned, Betty had an axe in her hands and threatened Candy to stay away from Alan. Candy said that when she agreed, she told Betty that she wasn't after Alan and that she just wanted to leave. And that's when Betty decided to strike her with an axe. The two women began to fight and struggle, and the details that would later be debated endlessly in courtrooms, books, and documentaries occurred. Because it's all he said and she said kind of in this situation, this is all coming from Candy. This is what we know for certain happened. Candy got a hold of the axe that originally came from Betty. Now, we don't know if it's Betty's axe or if Candy brought it, but this is just what Candy's telling us. So Candy got a hold of the axe and she used it. She struck Betty not just once, not just twice, but she kept on going. And the attack on Betty was very brutal and relentless. And by the time it had ended, Betty Gore had been struck over 41 times by Candy, 28 of those blows being to her head alone. The Gore's living room was covered in blood, the walls, the floor, the ceiling, like everything. It looked like an absolute slaughterhouse. And then, perhaps the worst detail of it all, Candy Montgomery calmly went to the kitchen, put down the axe, cleaned herself up. She went upstairs in the Gore's house, took a shower in their bedroom, changed into some of Betty's clothes, and then she left the Gore's house and took Betty's daughter Alyssa with her, just like she had planned earlier for the sleepover.
Wait, the kid was there the whole time?
She was in the car. So, yeah, I mean, yes. So that night, Alan was still away for work. Betty's youngest child, who was just a year old at the time, was crying and left alone in her crib until neighbors who could hear her screams discovered her inside the house upstairs by herself. In the next room over, they found Betty's completely destroyed and beaten in body. She was lying in a pool of blood with everything around it completely covered. Betty's left arm was the first thing that the neighbors and later police would notice after opening the front door to the Gore's house. The pool of blood that her body was laying in was so thick and large that they said it looked like her body was floating above the ground, which is a very
Oh my gosh.
isn't that a weird description? I've like never heard that, but isn't that an interesting description?
Yeah.
In fact, to get a look at her face, police officers had to walk around the room carefully, avoiding the mess. And that's because Betty had been struck so many times that her body was pretty much displayed throughout the entire room, which is so gross to think. Now, if you weren't already grossed out, little trigger warning here. When officers saw Betty's face, her lips were opened wide with all of her teeth that were still there and not having been knocked out. And she was pretty much had a giant grin on her face. And that was the only part of her face that still existed, was her smile. Her hair was spread out in all directions, some of it still being across the room. Betty's left eye was not attached, but staring down at the gaping holes in her arms. And as for her right eye, well, she didn't have one. And that's because her entire right half of her face was completely smashed in. Only a few feet away from Betty's body, the police found a half-concealed axe lodged under the freezer in the kitchen. It was a heavy wooden axe that was about 3 feet long. So if you ask me, like that's a big axe. That's not like a hand one. That's like for chopping wood kind of shit. So, and these are like small girls, I have to say. Now, once the news got out about Betty's murder, it obviously sent shockwaves throughout the small and seemingly quiet town of Wiley. This wasn't a town that had things that happened like this. Like robberies didn't really even take place, let alone a brutal axe killing. So the police quickly zeroed in on Candy, actually. She was the last person to see Betty alive that day. And Candy's actually the one that told the police that. So she was like, yeah, I was there picking up Alyssa's bathing suit for the sleepover. So I think I was the last person to see her alive. Obviously, the police were like, oh, okay, cool. Thanks for telling us that. But no one could believe that anyone as small as Candy had the actual physical strength to like wield that axe 41 fucking times. But even as the police's suspicion grew on Candy, they still found it really hard to believe that Betty's best friend, you know, this friendly, outgoing woman, suburban housewife, could do something so like horrific. Like, because if you remember, I mean, Candy was a loving mom to the community, devoted wife, churchgoer, you know, friend to everyone. Honestly, it's not like she was putting up like a crazy act either, because even after her best friend's body had been discovered, Candy was still acting like her normal self. So it wasn't like she, you know, changed her hair color or started acting weird or shit like that. Like she was just totally fine, which is scarier actually. Obviously, the murder sent shockwaves, like I said, through the town of Wiley. And with Candy being the number one suspect, she actually went to the police station and confessed to killing Betty and insisted that it was self-defense, which is kind of gnarly to me if you think about it, because I don't really understand how you can justify 41 stabbings basically as a self-defense. Not even stabbings, because it's not a fucking knife. It's an axe. I can't even chop wood for 5 minutes, let alone 41 times striking someone.
Oh, and then to also clean the axe, clean yourself up, and then take her kid with you back to your house?
Yeah, because on top of killing her best friend, she then went and showered in their bedroom and changed into Betty's clothes and then had a sleepover. It just doesn't make sense for someone claiming to be self-defense. But the trial of Candy Montgomery began in October 1980 in the town of McKinney, Texas, under a judge named Tom Ryan. But by then, the case in 1980 had pretty much drawn national attention via media, which we all know how that goes. So it was an open trial, reporters crammed into the courtroom along with regular civilians. You know for a fact we would have been there if it had been in our state, or maybe not even in our state, if it had been in our time. For every day of the trial, Candy walked into the courtroom looking like a normal picture of herself, basically. Suburban housewife, loving mother, definitely not someone who just brutally murdered her so-called best friend. So the prosecution was up first. They pretty much laid everything out there for the jury. They reminded them of the affair. They even called Alan Gore to the stand. And Alan admitted that, yes, he and Candy had had an affair for months, but he stated that the affair had ended months before Betty's death and that Candy didn't seem like the jealous type.
How did they find out about the affair? Did Candy confess to the affair when she confessed to the
Probably.
affair? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Or Alan did. It was a very, I guess, they didn't have issues talking about it. When the prosecution started to talk about the crime scene, jurors were shown photographs of Betty's room where her body was found, with her blood splattered throughout the walls and her body having been struck 41 times with the large axe. It was brutal and overwhelming for some of the jurors, and the prosecution pushed that definitely the entire situation did not look like self-defense. It looked like rage. At that point in the trial, the axe itself was introduced into evidence, and multiple forensic experts actually testified that Betty's wounds suggested she had been struck even after falling unconscious, so she wasn't fighting back. As for Candy, those exact same forensic experts showed that the only injuries to Candy's body were some cuts on her toes. Because you remember how Candy said in her story that Betty hit her first with the axe? Well,
Why would she aim for the toes?
right. Well, the
Yeah.
cuts on the toes were actually, they said, were the type of cuts if someone was barefoot in a room and applying pressure of forced pressure of standing up on your toes and going back down. So definitely just superficial shit. So basically the prosecution story was simple. Candy Montgomery had been driven by a jealousy and anger after Betty's confrontation about the affair, and Candy pretty much snapped, which is what it sounds like. So next was the defense's turn, and Candy's lawyer, who was named Don Crowder, admitted to the jury pretty much right away that yes, Candy killed Betty, but it wasn't murder, it was self-defense. So attorney Crowder wasn't a seasoned criminal attorney, and in fact, this was actually his first murder trial ever, but he was this bold, outspoken attorney, and he actually knew Candy personally. So he was able to talk about her in a way that maybe most attorneys wouldn't have been able to, which in this case was beneficial. At some point during the defense, Candy herself took the stand, and she told the jury how she went to Betty's house that morning to pick up the swimsuit for Betty's daughter. But once inside, Candy said that Betty confronted her about the affair, and Betty told Candy that she never wanted to see her again. And then, according to Candy, Betty left the room, came back with a large axe. Betty swung at her first. That's when the two of them struggled. And in that moment, Candy says she wasn't herself and that something took over her and made her fight for her life. So she grabbed the axe from Betty and swung back, but once she started, she couldn't stop. I will say, though, after Candy's testimony, a little bit of a twist came in the story. The defense then called to the stand a psychiatrist, a forensic psychiatrist, Dr. Fred Faison. Now, Dr. Faison testified that Candy had not only acted in self-defense, but she had most likely experienced what he called a dissociative reaction. So, according to Dr. Faison, during the fight between Candy and Betty, Betty at some point told Candy to quote unquote shush. And that one word triggered something in Candy. Apparently, as a child, Candy's mom often silenced her using the word shush and just like telling her to be quiet anytime she was angry or fearful. And so, after hearing Betty use that exact same word during a physical fight, the forensic psychiatrist said that Candy pretty much snapped in that moment and she lost control, disassociated, and she struck Betty again and again, almost as if she was like in a trance until she knew that Betty was dead.
I'm no psychiatrist, but when I think of disassociating, you'd think you wouldn't remember it, but it seems like Candy remembers the whole thing.
Right? Right. Well, now the prosecution pushed back after the defense, but none of their forensic experts or psychologists argued anything about Candy being like having dissociated. They stated it was pure rage, it was jealousy, and it was cold-blooded murder. They even pointed to the sheer number of blows as evidence that Candy was there to kill Betty. For the closing arguments, the jury were left with two very different stories. The prosecution stated that Candy was a jealous killer who butchered her friend, and the defense stated that Candy was a traumatized woman who fought back and lost control in self-defense. But, only after a few hours of deliberation, ladies, the jury came back with the verdict that Candy Montgomery was not guilty in the murder of Betty Gore. And
What?
October 30th,
Wow.
1980, Candy walked free.
What twist?
I mean, 41 times is a little ridiculous for claiming self-defense.
Yeah, I'm surprised I didn't claim like heat of passion, but it's still 41 times. Like, that's, I don't know if you could get away with, I don't know.
Self-defense, right?
Couldn't even give her like manslaughter?
41 times is like she did snap. That, but I don't think she disassociated from the whole thing. I think she fucking snapped.
There's no way that's self-defense. I mean,
There's no way.
even if someone is coming at you and they turn around, you continuing to like hit them, shoot them, stab them, whatever, that's no longer self-defense. Like when they're running, it can be sometimes,
I
like
don't
that's
even
been
think like
argued
hitting her
before.
4 times would be self-defense. Like I would say if you hit once or maybe twice, but like an axe is different.
After 41 hits, there's no way she's even standing up at that point.
No, and the forensic said that Betty was most likely unconscious for most of the axing, which means she wasn't fighting back.
Right.
They couldn't figure out whose axe it was?
Right.
Even Alan couldn't be like, yeah, we keep an axe in the house?
Nobody knew.
Weird.
Right. So the decision, as it did here, pretty much stunned nearly everyone in the courtroom. And for Candy, that trial was the end of one life, her so-called best friend, Betty Gore's, but the beginning of a new one for her. Candy and her husband eventually divorced after the trial, as they should have, and she moved away and did her best to disappear from the public eye. But before that happened, Candy continued to live in Wiley for a bit, but was quick to notice that the people of Wiley no longer had interest in being her best friend. People would cross the street to avoid her, and she could hear people whispering about her in church. And she had even stopped attending church because of the backlash of the trial's verdict. Candy quickly noticed basically that living in Wiley was no longer an option for her, which, like, yeah. So Candy and her still husband at the time, Pat, packed up their 2 kids and headed east, eventually landing themselves in Georgia. But the trauma followed them, and as their marriage was already tarnished from the affair and the trial, it pretty much unraveled, and the 2 quietly divorced in the early 1980s. As for Candy, this is a great part. The woman who sat through testimony in court for killing her best friend and saying that she had dissociative episodes and had been described as losing control. Well, she decided to reinvent herself as a mental health counselor. And her specialty became working with clients who struggled from depression, anxiety, but mostly trauma, which I find super ironic. As for Betty's husband, Alan, after the trial, his life was pretty much never the same, as it shouldn't be. Alan did testify in trial and admit to his affair with Candy, but he didn't really think that it would follow him like once the trial was completed. The people of Wiley, just like they were with Candy, weren't so forgiving. Neighbors often whispered about Alan. People tried their best to avoid him. And in the end, Alan just couldn't escape the rumors that he was the reason his wife had been killed. So at first, he did try his best to move forward. He still had the two girls at home to take care of. At some point, he did remarry, but that marriage unraveled pretty quickly within the first few years. And his daughters, at some point, also were sent to live with Betty's parents in Kansas. So now Alan ended up being by himself, which is like kind of sad, but also like, fuck you, Alan. So fortunately, the grandparents were able to give the Gore girls stability, and they ended up being raised with like great lives. So that's really good because they were babies. After his divorce from his second marriage, Alan retired from work and moved to Sarasota, Florida. Unlike Candy, who remade herself after the trial, Alan did his best, his very best, to simply fade into a quiet life. And that is the story of the murder of Betty Gore and the trial of Candy Montgomery.
I'm so mad.
Before we were recording today, Holly, I was telling Kylie how this story kind of pissed me off because I was writing it. It's such a juicy story. And then I get to the part of like researching the trial, and it was the biggest letdown because there was really no information on the trial. I had to scavenge like through articles and podcasts to figure out details about the trial. And then it was like, oh, the jury deliberated and she's not guilty. And then that's it. And I was like, okay, fuck the story. This sucks. Candy, you can't even find her anywhere online. Like, it's just, I mean, she's old now, but
I looked her up. She's alive, allegedly, and she's 75.
she might still be in Georgia. Who knows? Well, I don't know. Maybe she kept her last name. Candy Montgomery's her name. But yeah, isn't that crazy? She fucking killed her best friend horribly. It wasn't self-defense. Let's just be honest. She got away with it and then got to live the rest of her life.
This is one of the juries that makes me question why we even have juries.
I question a lot of why we have juries. I get them, but I also, in situations like this, don't get them.
And also, I'm blaming the prosecutor because usually you can say, okay, we're going to charge someone with first-degree murder, but we're also bringing second degree or like manslaughter. If you don't find them guilty on like first-degree murder, the jury can give them something less, not just outright acquit.
It made no sense. Anyways, you guys want to jump into overtime?
Let's jump.
The prompt for today was things we need to bring back. And my first example I gave was 20 plus episode TV seasons.
Which is genius.
I don't care if they're like 30 minutes. I don't want 6 episodes that are an hour and a half long.
No.
I
like
don't
that's the thing these days is like I'm currently watching a TV show that only has 8 episodes and it pisses me off.
I don't want to sit down and watch a movie every time I go to watch my programs.
I get it.
Programs.
I got 30 minutes before I fall asleep. I want to watch one episode. And, I'm not going to pause it in the middle of it because, like, something happens. I got to keep watching.
That's a good one. Bring them
I'm
back.
not over that you called them programs.
I watch my programs.
My programs are on.
To each their own, but something that I think needs to be brought back is I personally love handwritten letters, like in the mail. Like I loved growing up writing my friends or cousins like letters, and we would write back and forth, like pen pals. Bring back pen pals.
Yes, that was actually something I had in mind. Was like notes, like little kids would write each other notes in class. Now they don't do that; they text. And I was going through some of my mom's old notes. Actually, not my mom, my mother-in-law, but I was going through some of her old notes that she had written, like her friends when she was in like high school and junior high. And they're so cute. They decorate them and then they'd like pass them in between classes. Kids don't do it's.
Or like notebook. Did you guys ever had it like you had a notebook and you would write something on there and give it to your friend? They'd write something and it'd be response back and forth. And so you have this whole fucking conversation on like a few pages of the book. Yeah.
But I did gossiping via postal mail.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Remember
who doesn't love getting mail?
Exactly. But like remember when you're a kid and you're like, okay, I've got some juicy gossip and I gotta wait until I get to school tomorrow to tell people. Like the excitement and thrill it gives you. Imagine having to mail it, how much joy you would get and you open that gossip.
Y'all, should we start doing that with each other?
That's it. No longer doing the podcast. It's all via mail.
Yes, sign up for the mailing list on our website.
Yeah.
It'll be gossip.
Yeah, we'll write you guys.
Dude, for real. Actually, that's so fun. Wait, this may not go, but do you guys remember the sour Altoids?
Cameron
Yes,
loved
the
those.
tangerine ones were
Yeah.
my favorite.
Where the heck are those things?
Yeah.
And why are they not here?
Wow, that brings back like elementary school for me.
They were like mints, that were sour, and they were perfect because now I don't know, there was just something so perfect about them. Like it's almost like a little mint. You can carry them in a little tin, put them in your purse, put them in your pocket. Now you got to go like buy a bag of candy. I don't know.
Yeah.
I used to put the little secret notes I got in elementary school in my
Yes.
Altoid can.
Yeah.
Things used to be so much cuter.
Okay, so when we were doing this prompt earlier, my husband Cameron was sitting next, he was in the room with me, and I asked him, I said, Cameron, just what's the first thing you think of that needs to be brought back? And his answer, and I told him I was going to say it on here because it just is ridiculous to me, but he said sock and boppers. Do you guys know what sock and boppers
Are those little robots?
They're kind of, no, it's inflatable. It's literally like pool inflatables for your fists, and you fight your friends with them.
That's got to be a boy thing.
Like that was
Yeah.
literally within a few seconds. He was like sock and boppers, and I was like, "What?" I had to Google because I didn't know what it was either.
You know what I want to bring back? Awkward phases. These children
Yeah,
need awkward phases to build
haircuts.
character.
Yep.
It's not fair.
If I have to guess whether or not that kid's in middle school or my age, it pisses me off.
Yeah.
And
It
I
just
think
doesn't build any character to just go through life like watching TikToks and figuring out how to do your makeup and watching YouTube and like be like I don't know.
My
That's what-
face had orange concealer powder on it for like 3 years, and nobody, and eyebrows that look like blocks, and no one told me that until I looked back at my photos, and I was like, why did my mom ever let me out of the house like that? And then my mom would tell me, oh no, I told you multiple times, you just didn't listen to me. People, they need to have that embarrassment.
No, I think every girl's first foundation should be the Maybelline Dream Matte Mousse
Yes.
in a shade that's
Yes.
too dark for them.
Yes.
And I said this
don't
before, but Sephora and Ulta should require driver's licenses at the door.
Yes, I
What's the
agree.
age? What's the age?
16. I think.
16.
I'm cool with that.
Okay, something I want to bring back, barbershop quartets.
In what way?
The other day I went to go get my hair done.
Such a Kylie thing.
I was hoping there was a store and yeah.
I'm getting my hair done. She's like, do you want me to put a mask in? I was like, yeah, that's fine. She takes me to the back, washes my hair, puts the mask in, and she's like, okay, I'm gonna let you sit here for like 15, 20 minutes. I was in that back room by myself for 20 minutes, no phone, no entertainment, nothing, by myself. And I was like, God, I wish we had some kind of entertainment in the hair salon. And then I was like, barbershop quartets. That was their whole thing. We got rid of those.
Wait, Kate's gonna drag me, but you know what? You really shouldn't because there's no way you were alive when there was barbershop quartets. Is that like entertainment while you're getting your hair done? With the
Yeah,
that's where it started.
Oh.
That's why they're called barbershop quartet. Do you know what a quartet is?
Yes. I know what they are. I just didn't know that's how they started.
Yes, that's why they have their little uniforms too.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I guess it's never like I've seen barbershop quartets, like pictures, videos, like, the things on them, but it never popped into my mind like why.
Yeah. Kylie was not alive for barbershop quartets. So she was pure using her boredom imagination in the back of that salon room, wanting entertainment. Now,
She was probably using her critical thinking skills, which sometimes lack for me.
I would have said like, oh, a TV. I wouldn't have thought barbershop quartets. Now, I don't know why when I think barbershop quartets, I think of that movie, The Haunted Mansion,
Mm-hmm.
and the barbershop quartet singers or whatever, the heads.
With Eddie Murphy.
Yes, the heads.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, TV would be nice, but I was like, okay, it'd have to be like mounted to the ceiling, blah, blah, blah. I'd have to like deal with the remote.
Like a dentist.
If I had like 4 fat old white guys singing to me,
I would laugh the entire time.
that would be way more entertaining.
You didn't just fall asleep. Like in my situation, if I was in your situation with that, I would have taken a nap.
And the position I was sitting in, no, I had to come home and put a heating pad on my back. Getting old.
Okay, well, that's an interesting one, Kylie. So on to the next one. Cameron said sock and boppers, which made me think, okay, what are like physical items that need to come back? Did you guys ever have Heelys?
That's on my list.
Is it? I
Mm.
fucking, if they exist to this day, somebody message me. I'll give you my address. I'll pay you. I fucking loved Heelys.
I'm sure you can find them in some antique store.
Oh my
Dude.
God. But do you remember how big they were like thick?
Yeah. They're like
Dude.
skater shoes,
Yeah.
literally.
They still sell them
Stop.
everywhere.
How weird would it be now if you just saw me out and about rolling?
I would
Yeah.
honestly have so much respect for you.
Would you?
Yeah.
I probably
No,
wouldn't.
for real.
I probably wouldn't be like, oh, look at that stupid nerdy person with the Heelys. I'd be like, where'd you get these?
Not anymore. I would love to see you walk and then just like take off in a sprint and just glide.
I used to do it at the
I'd
airport.
pay money for that.
Yep.
God, it was a sad day in elementary school when they banned the Heelys.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So my
Yeah.
last one is Vine. For those that
Yeah.
don't know, it was only a short year or two of our lives in high school. There was an app called Vine, and it was the best app of them all. And it was just funny videos. I swear the funniest shit came from Vine.
No ads, no like, I mean, maybe they had some kind of like elementary algorithm, but it wasn't so tailored. So like the videos that were trending and that were funny, everyone knew what they were.
And it was like 15 seconds or something like,
Yeah.
like it was very
7.
short.
Know if it's necessarily a bring back because I don't know if this has ever been a thing, but I think everyone should have a spring break.
In life.
Yeah, like in the workforce, okay, we have New Year's off and then there's like MLK Day, and then we have nothing until like Memorial Day.
Yeah.
There's like a 2-month stretch, no holidays.
That's not fair. And then there's so many holidays compact in one. We need to spread them out. No, we don't need to spread them out. We need more. You're right, Kylie. We need another.
Give me once a month. I would take that.
A long weekend once a month.
Or also, why are we not getting certain holidays off and getting other ones? I'm not going to name the ones that we should get rid of because we shouldn't get rid of any, but there's some that I just make me question things. And then there's days like Veterans Day. Don't get it off from work. Kind of a slap in the face to the veterans.
I don't know about y'all's companies, but like we have Black Friday off, but we don't have Christmas Eve off.
Same. And
That's
actually,
crazy.
as someone, my family celebrates Christmas Eve. We don't celebrate Christmas because of Polish tradition. So I always have to take off Christmas Eve from work. And then I'm like, I'll work Christmas if you want me to. And they're like, well, no one's going to be on. That pisses me off. But yet I get 2 days for Thanksgiving.
I wonder if it's just like a day to be hungover, how we have like New Year's Day off.
Right. Why do we not have New Year's Eve?
Yeah, is it just a built-in hangover day?
It just makes me mad. I'm getting angry.
Okay, this was supposed to be lighthearted. I'm so sorry, guys.
I'm getting a little frustrated about this one. That, the barbershop quartet.
That pissed you off?
No, it didn't. It made me just think things.
Your life.
Just Holly, and her imagination of what things are.
For lack thereof.
Lack thereof.
I knew Kay's gonna drag me. She always expects so much of me for me to like
I do.
know everything.
Isn't that a good thing though? That I truly think that you know the world, Holly. So when you don't, it just shocks me.
That's right.
You know what? I'm gonna hire a barbershop quartet to come to the bachelorette party.
Yep. Yeah, not strippers. Barbershop quartet.
Yeah, nobody hires strippers, please.
Nobody wants strippers.
I hope nobody does that.
I do want a magician at mine.
Even if you never get married, I think we should throw you some kind of party like that, some kind of weird.
No, we're doing it for your 40th, right?
I already have it planned out. Okay, wrap this up and I'll tell you.
I already know what it is. Cam plans on attending.
Oh,
I don't know if he's invited. Okay, no, actually, we do need him. Okay.
We're all gonna rethink our lives after Kylie's 40th bachelorette party.
yeah, we'll come back different.
Yeah. So, anyways, yeah. So, thank you for tuning in to another episode. Oh, by the way, you guys, before I end this, the next time you hear us, we will have attended CrimeCon. Woo, 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 woo. So, we are about to leave in a week, less than a week when this airs for CrimeCon in Denver. Super excited. We got the schedule. It's slammed packed with like so many fun things to do. It's basically, we're going to be there for 5 days, including travel days. It's going to be great. We're going to be excited. We'll take notes. We'll vlog. We'll do all that shit that we don't normally do. And it's going to be awesome. If you're going, let us know. I have tons of people at my gym that are super excited for our episode post CrimeCon. So that'll have to be, or like a special episode or something, So
I'm so pumped.
so excited. So anyways, with that being said, Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Over My Dead Pod. For more information about the case today, you can check us out on our website at overmydeadpod.com or on our social medias at overmydeadpod, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatever you want, YouTube. And we will see you guys next week for another episode. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.